Let me give you another illustration. 2,000 years before the time of Galileo, the great Greek scholar Aristotle made the following statement. He said, "Heavy objects fall faster than light objects." In other words, if you take a heavy object and a light object and release them at the same time, the heavy object will fall faster. All right, this is a proposition, a generalization. It can be either true or not true. How can we test Aristotle's generalization that heavy objects fall faster than light objects? How can we test this? For truth. Do it? Try it? Good idea. Just so happens I have with me a couple of objects this evening. In my left hand I have a small cannonball, weighs about 5 pounds. And in my right hand I have a golf ball that weighs about 1.5 ounces or so. All right? And actually what Aristotle said was that the rate of the fall is proportional to the weight. Now this is 5 pounds. There's 1.5 ounces, 16 ounces to the pound. So this will clearly fall faster than the cannonball. I mean, the cannonball will clearly fall faster than the golf ball if we release them at the same time. Now, of course, that's one possibility. The cannonball will fall faster. However, another possibility is that the golf ball will fall faster. Is that not so? Another possibility is I will let go of them and they'll just hang there. They won't go anywhere. Another possibility is cannonball goes up, golf ball goes down. And so the way to make this determination, and this is not a minor point, the way to make this determination, there's only one way to be certain. Try it. How many of you have tried this experiment? Let me see a show of hands. How many of you also know that this is one of the most important experiments in the entire history of mankind? That simple little experiment leads to things like this tape recorder. And much more. Going to the moon. And much more. Now, it would also be nice if we had a vacuum chamber to release these in, precisely calibrated instruments that release them at the same instant, but without any of that, I'm going to drop these on the stage. You watch the fall. It's not easy for me to release these at the same instant. It's a little difficult, but I'll do the best I can. And we're going to test out Aristotle's generalization on falling bodies. We'll see what happens. Within the limitations of our experiment, clearly the cannonball did not fall 60 times faster than the golf ball. As a matter of fact, they fell at the same rate. All right. Now what do we have? We have an observed exception to Aristotle's generalization. Now, if we're good scientists, of course, it's not enough that we perform the experiment just one time. Remember, repeatability. We'll just do it one more time and see what happens. Because the first one could have been a fluke. I've never done it on this stage before. Yeah, I think I did once before. So we'll try. So, what this means, among other things, is Aristotle is not looking so good. Because the true statement, or the true generalization, is that heavy objects and light objects fall at the same rate. You could have a 100,000-pound cannonball and a feather. If you had a good enough vacuum chamber, they would fall at the same rate. How many of you saw an astronaut drop a hammer and a feather on the surface of the moon? How many saw this experiment? And what happened? They landed at the same time. Because the atmosphere of the moon, clearly not zero, it has a very rare atmosphere, especially compared to the greater density of our Earth's atmosphere. And so the atmospheric resistance was negligible on the surface of the moon, and the feather and the hammer land at the same time. Now, please note that the physical science definition of true is completely arbitrary. Let's look at it again. That's completely arbitrary. which means it's subject to individual will or judgment. All definitions used in science are arbitrary. All definitions are coined by individual volitional beings. You do not have to accept or agree with this definition of true. All definitions in science are used for the specific purpose of precision communication. If you prefer to use some other definition of true, then do it. And even though we may have different definitions of true, we can still communicate. And if I define true, then you know what I mean. And if you define true, then I know what you mean. And it is not necessary to argue over every definition. Someone might define true, for example, as that which the authority I respect says is true. Fine, then I know what he means by true. As a matter of fact, that's what most people mean when they say something is true. It's true based on the authority I respect, what he or she says. Although most people don't realize this. Most people have not independently observed and tested the things that they say are true for truth. Well, the question arises then, how broadly can the physical science standard of truth be applied? Can it only be applied to build, let's say, television sets? 100-story skyscrapers or pop-up toasters? Is that all this is good for? Because that is where it has been used almost exclusively. I will demonstrate in V50 that the standard of truth based upon observation can be effectively applied to build solutions to the principal social problems. We have to build upon observation to get results, but what if your standard of truth is, let's say, beyond observation? And what does beyond observation mean? That means you can't see it, you can't hear it, you can't feel it, you can't taste it, you can't smell it. Well, now, if you throw out all of the senses as a source of knowledge, what knowledge can you perceive? What does knowledge beyond observation mean? What does that mean? Well, it means you have no observational or empirical inputs. If the mind has zero inputs, then what can the best of minds evaluate? If there are no inputs going into a computer, then what can the best of computers evaluate? Zero inputs equals what? Zero outputs. If you have zero inputs and any outputs at all greater than zero, something is wrong. The machine is broke. Essentially, that would involve quackery. All right, as I said, if one had the time, he could devise an infinite number of definitions of truth. If you had an infinite amount of time to work on this, in the last analysis, how do you know if your definition of truth is any good, this one, or any number of infinite definitions? How do you know anyone's definition is any good? That's pretty important to know how to test this. Here's an acid test for you. Ask this question. Can your definition of truth build an electrical generator that successfully generates electrical energy? Can your definition of truth result in the discovery of microscopic bacteria? Can it do that? Can your definition of truth transport you safely from Los Angeles to New York? Will your definition of truth enable you to have lunch in Los Angeles and dinner in New York City on the same day? On the same day. Will your definition of true accomplish that? Or you say if a definition of true could lead to that, that might be a useful definition of true? One that builds tape recorders, rocket engines, electric clocks? Would that be a useful definition of true if we could do all that? Finally, will your definition of true enable you to build solutions to the social catastrophes, poverty, war, riot, inflation, vandalism, famine? I will demonstrate in V50 that just as there is only one concept of true that can lead to a technology that will enable us to have luncheon in Los Angeles and dinner in New York City on the same day, and that is true means that which is observable, because that's the one that has enabled us to do all of these things. I will also demonstrate there is only one concept of true that will enable us to ultimately obsolete the international hostility that leads to war and all of the other problems. And that's the same definition. True means that which is observable. And I will explain that up to this point in time, prior to this theory, this concept has not been successfully applied on a total basis to the social structure to solve the problems. One of the things I will accomplish in this course is to explain how to apply it. As a total concept to everything. I think one of the most amazing things about Aristotle's statement that heavy objects fall faster than light objects is not so much that Aristotle was wrong. I have not brought this up to embarrass Mr. Aristotle. I think, as a matter of fact, I think this is at least, in my opinion, the second most amazing thing that I know of in all history. Would any of you be interested in knowing what I think is the second most amazing thing in all history? Anyone? All right, sir. Thank you. I know there are more than just one. Second most amazing thing I even know of. And think about this. For 2,000 years, that's a period of time 10 times longer ago than was the American Revolution. For 2,000 years, no one ever tested Aristotle's generalization on falling bodies for what? Truth! For 2,000 years. Ladies and gentlemen, all they would have to have done was what? To test this out. Was it because they didn't have billions of dollars of money funded for this experiment? Was it because they couldn't find any high places where they could drop something? Or they didn't have the time, or they didn't have the resources? Or was that the reason? Ladies and gentlemen, for 2,000 years, nobody tried it. And if there was someone who did, they didn't make anything of it. Finally, 2,000 years later, Galileo, one of his assistants, dropped a cannonball and a light shot from the Leaning Tower at Pisa right off the leaning side. And guess what happened? They landed at the same time. And Galileo repeated the experiment over and over again. In fact, Galileo repeated this experiment in front of most of the students and faculty at the university at Pisa. And the students and the learned faculty were so overwhelmed. They were so impressed with this major discovery of Galileo that Galileo was forced to leave the university. Please note, the learned faculty and students are watching them fall from the Tower of Pisa clearly at the same rate. This is unacceptable. Aristotle says heavy objects fall faster than light objects. This is unacceptable. And you do remember the little story I gave you at the end of the first half last week on intellectual honesty? Another illustration of how deeply rooted is intellectual dishonesty. Would any of you be interested in knowing what I may think in time will be looked upon as the most amazing thing in history. All right, I'll share it with you. I'll make this prediction, that when freedom is finally established, as a matter of fact, when it's fully established as I defined it, I said freedom is what? I said when you as an individual have liberty, that's when you have total control of the derivatives of your life called your property, primordial, primary, and secondary property. When you have liberty, and everyone else has liberty, and there's not one slave, I said that's freedom. When freedom is finally achieved, ladies and gentlemen, this definition I gave you, where everybody has 100% control over his own property, this is the other way of stating it. When this is finally achieved, people will look back with even greater amazement, and they will ask this question: why did it take 6,000 years for man to discover that you cannot solve a single problem with physical force? Why did it take 6,000 years to discover that you cannot help a man by stealing his property? Why did it take so long to find this out? And you know what the answer will be? The same. Nobody tried it. Nobody tried it. Well, we're going to try it. And when you do try it, you will find out it works. In the long run, ladies and gentlemen, freedom is the only thing that will work. That is true, however, only once the physical sciences are integrated. If Newton had not integrated the physical sciences and they had not been done subsequently by someone else, there wouldn't be any crisis. If your kill technology is bows and arrows and spears, as I've already pointed out, I mean, how many men can the world's most outstanding spearsman spear and kill in one day? One man. How many can he kill in one day? 100 men in one day? If you can kill 100 men with a spear in one day, and they're fighting against you to keep themselves from getting speared and killed, and you can kill 100 men in one day, that's pretty impressive, isn't it? But even if you had spearsmen, that there were an army of spearsmen that were that competent at throwing spears, it doesn't matter because people procreate faster than you can kill them off. This as a goal is only necessary when you have the integration of the physical sciences, because shortly thereafter you'll be smart enough to destroy yourself. And one man can push a button and wipe out 100 million people, or we can do this through other means I haven't even discussed, like bacteriological warfare, which is even a greater threat than thermonuclear warfare to the species, and they're improving the technology all the time. At that point, then freedom must be a goal, and that is a product of integrating the third domain of knowledge. And we call that domain of knowledge the volitional sciences. In a moment, we're going to take a break. Before we have a break, I'd like you to remain seated. I have a few announcements.
You're listening to Session 2, Part 3 of the V50 Lectures by J. Stuart Snelson. For more information about the V50 Lectures, visit www.volitionalscience.org. The V50 Lectures, copyright 2008 by J. Stuart Snelson.